It's great to be back home. Home is where I want to be. I've been on the road so long, my friend. We have a lot of different guests on this show, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do it. I wanted to pull from sports, entertainment, politics, finance, the law, college, you name it. And we're breaking new ground tonight, and this is good for me because it actually keeps me with a broader perspective than I otherwise might have. Those that know me are laughing uproariously, I know that. But with that said, I am pleased to introduce Rochelle Ripley, the president and founder of Hawkwing, Inc. since 1968, a nonprofit dedicated to assisting the Lakota people on the Cheyenne River, Lakota Sioux Indian Reservation with their basic human needs while fostering a better understanding between the native and non-native worlds. Rochelle has a list of accolades as long as your arm. 2015 Top 10 CNN Hero, 2015 Red Nation Film Festival Humanitarian of the Year, 2016 People Magazine Hero Recognition. She holds a bachelor's in psychology from Connecticut State University, mother of two, daughter and a deceased son, and she is a grandmother of four. She's been appointed by Governor O'Neill, the former governor of Connecticut, as a founding member of the Connecticut Commission on Children, certified preservation specialist, spokesman for Match, an activist at the local, state, and national levels for women's rights, native rights, workers' rights, and peace. And Rochelle, I mean, I could just keep reading that all night. How are you, my dear?
I am good. It's comfortable where I'm at, even though it's still a little sticky outside.
It's, and I agree with you. And I was just mentioning before we came on, we can complain about the heat, we can complain about the cold, but in reading about this group of Native people that you advocate for, we have nothing to complain about. Can you tell us what got you started in doing this and about this group of Indian people?
Sure. You're right about the weather, and I never complain about rain because out on the Cheyenne River Reservation, rain is a desperately needed quantity. So I've learned not to get grouchy when it's raining 3 or 4 days in a row, to be grateful because they need rain very desperately right now. They're in high drought. My grandmother, my father's mother, was Lakota Sioux, and as a little girl, she was kind of my North Star. She was my person that was the person I came to, went to when I had needs, and for me, the sun rose and set on my grandmother. When I was a little girl, I had a very traumatic event happen in my life, and my grandma told me when I was 5 that I came from 2 different backgrounds, the Indian and the non-Indian world, in order to bring those 2 worlds together and make life better all the way around. And although I was only 5 years old, she asked me to promise her that I would go home and help our people when I grew up. And so I'm grown up. And about 20 years ago, when my eldest granddaughter was born, I went out to the reservation and began the work of Hawkwing, which was to see where we could help and how we could help and be directed by the people on the ground, the tribal council, the grassroots people, the elders, so that we would be in keeping with what they needed and how we might fit in to help.
Now, if I could just stick a pin here for a moment, and I did not mention this and I was remiss, you were calling me from neighboring Glastonbury, Connecticut. Your college degree is from Connecticut. The reservation is far away from here. Did you grow up as a, for lack of a better term, a local American girl?
No. No, I have a very mixed background. My mother's side of the family were immigrant Orthodox Jews. My father's side was Native and Irish. And I grew up in New York City as a young girl, upstate New York as an older child. Went to college initially down at Washington, D.C. at George Washington University. Transited my way up to Connecticut when I got married and have raised my family here. So I've lived the longest in Connecticut of all places. But I grew up very poor. My background was not in a wealthy area of New York City, to say the least. It is now the area known as the Dominican part of New York City. Before that, the Latino part, and before that, it was part of a transitioning community from the white community to the African American community.
Right, and I know the part of town that you were in.
Yeah, just about 10 blocks south of the George Washington Bridge.
Right.
So, so no, I didn't grow up with any kind of privilege. We were very poor in our own family, and we had our own challenges within our family. Addictions are, as you probably know, a big part in Native America, especially alcoholism, and unfortunately my dad was an active alcoholic. And the challenges were everywhere. I had to fund and raise the money to do my own college education. And when I finished at George Washington, I still had a year to go when we moved to Connecticut. And I went to Central and had to make up an additional year to get my degree from Central. So no, I've been kind of all over the place. But now I like to tell people that I probably am the only person in Connecticut that commutes to South Dakota for my work.
and right you are. Now, what exactly is Hawkwing, and what led you to found it?
So Hawkwing is a nonprofit. We are a tax-exempt nonprofit agency. Our base is here in Connecticut in terms of where the office is, where our warehouse is. And it is designed to do two things. One is to provide cross-cultural education between the native and non-native worlds so that we can all understand each other better. And the second is to provide for the basic human needs of the people on the Cheyenne River Reservation and occasionally some of the other Lakota reservations in South Dakota as well. But our main focus is on Cheyenne River, where my ancestors descended from.
Now, what is life like on the reservation, and what is it like for young people, and what do those of us who have never been near a reservation need to know about being on a reservation?
So reservations vary from place to place. Certainly here in Connecticut, we have the Mashantucket and the Mohegan and several other smaller tribal nations here, which is a very different design than there is out in the Midwest. So if you go out to the Midwest, that's where the sort of classical reservation that people think of are located. And you can go from Oklahoma up through the Dakotas, and that's where your major, I don't want to say traditional, but I'll say it for lack of a better word, reservations are. Reservations started as really prisoner of war camps. Nobody much thinks of them that way at this point, but that is how they started.
In effect.
Native peoples were forced from their land and forced onto these reserves, if you will, where most of the time, and that applies to today as well, they are geographically isolated. The land is often not farmable, and that's true on the Cheyenne River Reservation. And it's isolated from most industry and businesses. So it creates a self-fulfilling cycle of poverty and lack of the basic human resources that people need. Life on reservations is very tough. It is not an easy life to go through. Hunger is very prevalent. And many of our children are fully dependent during the week on the breakfast and lunch programs provided through the federal government to many of our children around the country. But on the weekends, many of our kids go home to no food. One of our schools, by the way, the reservation is the size and the shape of the state of Connecticut. I mean, literally the shape of the state of Connecticut. It's the poorest place in America by U.S. Census, and Connecticut is the wealthiest. So there's some really deep irony between where I live and where I work.
Where you work.
The similarities and differences between the two. Now, 10,000 people live on the Cheyenne River Reservation. We have about 3.2 million here in Connecticut, same landmass. But it's very challenging because our unemployment rate runs between 85 and 90%. That's the unemployment rate. There's literally very few jobs available. Some of the jobs available are more professional, like teaching or medical services. Often our people have never had the opportunity to go for advanced education to fill those positions. So getting a job and keeping a job is very, very difficult. Many of the outer-lying roads are not paved. So we have 5 seasons as opposed to the 4 we have here in Connecticut. We have summer, winter, spring, fall, and mud.
And mud.
Yep, mud season is a fun season. And that often interferes with access to medical services as well as access to schools and work. So it's very hard. Our children lack most things that we see here in Connecticut and in the broader American culture. It's unusual for them to have access to computers, which in this day and age, as we all know, educationally and work-related, you have to know a basic computer to basically function in the economic world. But for many of our children, that's not accessible. Getting an internet connection in many parts of our reservation is virtually impossible. So it's a challenge to keep up with their peers around the country. We have a growing problem on our reservation right now, and I know people are going to question this when I give you this statement, but it's factual. We have probably one of the highest suicide rates among our young people anywhere in the United States and probably the world. Since January of this year, there have been 55 suicide attempts among a population of young people that is about maybe 700 kids. So that's about a 7 or 8% suicide attempt rate. Now, thankfully, not all of them have been successful, but the majority of them have. And this includes children as young as 12 and as old as 21. So we really need to increase the support, the activities and opportunities for our young people, because that's a completely, horribly unacceptable number. If I translate that to Glastonbury, where I live, where there's probably 3,200 kids, maybe 4 times the number of kids in that same age group, that would mean 220 suicide attempts. And I don't think anybody in Glastonbury or anywhere around the country can imagine a community with that many suicide rates and no services and no intervention available.
Now, there's you have said so much, and so many questions like light bulbs go popping off in my head. I guess my first question is how and why we see a lot of, whatever you want to call it, activism for differing groups, Hispanic groups, people of color, Asian groups, but yet the whole Indian population, at least to me, and I'm guilty of it, it escapes your view. It escapes your consciousness. And this is going on and my first question is, why? Is it just a self-fulfilling prophecy? Is it it's not sexy enough for government? You tell me.
Well, I wish I had a simple answer to that question, because I have that same question all the time in my own mind. But by the same token, I can give you some theories of both mine and other people's theories. We have to go back to the very origins of this country to take a look at what has happened to bring us to today. If we go back to the Declaration of Independence, which I think most Americans, myself included, think of as one of the seminal documents establishing the
foundation of the country.
In the Declaration, in writing, Native Americans are referred to as merciless Indian savages. Anybody who wants to check that, they go right to the original document.
I didn't know that.
Look it up. When you start out as a nation determined that you're going to annihilate the First Nations people, and it came very close to doing that, it becomes very difficult to back away from that position. So we've become invisible, and I think your description is very, very apt. I refer to our children as the children America has left behind. Nobody wants to, I won't say nobody, many people don't want to know about it. Many people have no idea of what's going on in Indian country. But, you know, your country is only as strong as its weakest part. It's only as strong as its inclusion of all peoples in the nation. Our population is small. It's about 2 to 3% of the overall American population. So when you don't have political power, because your numbers are that small, and you're isolated often in areas where you don't have access to, let us say, the halls of power, it becomes very difficult to catch the attention of media and other people. So for our kids, when they see themselves, and you know, this is a very big controversy in Indian country, when they see themselves made fun of, like certain mascot characterizations and stories that are written about Native people that are not accurate. And that adds to this sense of being invisible and not being important. which definitely adds to the trauma and to the depression that so many of our young people suffer from in the present day. So you go through the history of America. We were not allowed to practice our own spirituality until 1978. That's not ancient history. And yet, even though the Constitution guarantees freedom of religion, it didn't for natives. It specifically excluded the practice of native spirituality.
I did not know that either.
And in 1924, the first peoples of this continent finally got the right to be American citizens if they chose to. So we're not going back really far to take a look at why we are not viewed through a lens of concern and caring. Up until 2 years ago, the state of South Dakota was illegally coming onto our reservations, which, as I'm sure you know, are sovereign nations in their own right.
Within their own right, yeah, like here.
And removing our children without cause and without legal documentation. They would remove them. Parents would then go to say, why were my children taken away? And they were told, well, you have no standing because you're not a resident of South Dakota, you're a resident of an Indian reservation. So that case was taken up by the ACLU, and ironically, the lead attorney on Native American rights for the ACLU is Stephen Pevar, who lives in West Hartford. And he took that case up through the federal courts, won the case hands down, because the state of South Dakota could not provide a single document on any one of the roughly 900 children who had been illegally removed. So you say to yourself, well, why the heck would the state of South Dakota do that?
Right.
Well, because the state of South Dakota passed a law saying that all Native American children, by virtue of being Native American, would be classified as special needs. No testing, no standards.
Wonderful.
The only standard was you were Native American. And that allowed the state of South Dakota to collect double the foster care allotment for every Native child.
Oh, ain't that great, yeah.
2 years
Failure
ago.
pays, yeah.
So we have this history that is either invisibility or suppression of the Native people.
Now, you mentioned the characterization of the Indian peoples, and Mike, my producer, had mentioned a book written, you may or may not be familiar with it, by a gentleman by the name of Sherman Alexie called The Lone Ranger and Tano, Fist Fight in Heaven. And I'm not familiar with it, and there's also a movie called Smoke Signals.
Correct.
And what, in your opinion, as far as the characterization of the Indian people in those works, to the degree you know them, what might be your impressions of that? Again, I'm unfamiliar on both.
Yeah, well, I actually know Sherman, so it's just kind of one of those ironies that we were at a joint conference and seated together at a table.
Mm-hmm.
Sherman uses a lot of what I call Indian humor. It's sort of sarcastic, sideways humor. It's not sort of head-on humor. One of his most recent books is The Almost True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, and that's designed at about an 8th grade, 9th grade level. That particular book I would recommend for anybody who'd really like to understand the conflict of being Native America and in America at the same time. I think Sherman does a great job through, as I said, a little bit of irony, a little bit of sarcasm, describing kind of what the situation was. He said to a group that I was in one time, he said, you know, most of you grew up being told, eat everything on your plate, there's starving children in Asia. He said, I grew up with the same kind of thing. My mother would say, eat everything on your plate, there's starving children next door. So keeping that kind of, you know, little bit of sarcasm in there, he's very accurate. I think he did a fabulous job in both the book and in the movie adaptation of it. Smoke Signals is still around. You can still get it and you know, take a look at it. It does give you a pretty interesting view. The opening scene of Smoke Signals is two Native American young people, probably teens, in a car talking to each other, two young women. And two or three young men come up to the car. They start this little dialogue, what you doing? Oh, I'm bored, what are you doing? And finally one of the girls says, do you want to go for a ride? They say, oh, sure, and they pile in the back seat, and they proceed to drive backwards down the road. And I started laughing in the movie. I was seeing it in West Hartford, and people were going, that's not funny, that's not funny. And it's like they just didn't get it, because you do see cars that are not going to be put off the market until everything in that car is no longer working because people need a car. So the only gear she had left was reverse, so that's how they drove. That's a classic Sherman Alexie, you know, kind of demonstrating the poverty and the deprivation through humor.
It's amazing. I learn something every time I do this show. One question I wanted to ask you: economic development. Our state, for example, has the casinos. When the casinos come, they bring all sorts of things: good, bad, wretched, troubling, dangerous. As my father would say, quote unquote, a lot of not the right kind of people sometimes. And is this a good means of economic development for the native peoples, or should government so-called and business so-called look at other things?
Well, it really geographically depends on where you are in this country as to whether or not a casino is even something that's feasible. So in the state of South Dakota, took care of all of that by declaring casinos legal anywhere in the state. Therefore, nobody's going to drive 3.5 hours up to Cheyenne River to go to a casino when they can be in their own hometown and gamble if that's what they choose.
Right.
So, you know, here, Connecticut was the classic real estate. Location, location, location. They were in the right place at the right time and have been able to go forward in an economically beneficial way. We couldn't do that on our reservation even if we chose to, because it just would not work.
I understand.
I would rather see, this is me personally speaking, I'm not a gambler. It's not something I've...
Neither am I.
With. I've learned the odds a long time ago when I was a prevention specialist that, you know, the house is going to win 98% of the time. I'm not willing to do a 2% bet. So I would rather see more culturally appropriate economic development that builds skills and allows people to support their families in a positive way. Cheyenne River does not have any gambling facilities except the bingo hall, which is really for local people. But outside of that, it is not there, and it's not their intent to go forward with that for a variety of reasons. So for me, it's up to an individual tribe. It's not my place to tell another tribe what to do, or even to tell my own tribe what to do. But I would prefer to see more viable industry. There's a problem, though, when you're on a reservation. There are tons of federal laws that make development on an Indian reservation extremely difficult, because, and those aren't tribal laws, those are federal laws, because we don't own our own land. Even though those are our reservations, the land is held in trust for Native people as though we're not competent to run our own affairs. Therefore, the federal government always has veto power over everything that we do. And the rules and regulations that are in place, that are far more complex than I will ever understand in my own lifetime, make it difficult for a business who may want to invest to be able to feel that they can do that in an economically safe way. So there's that complication that comes in on top of everything else. I just got back from the reservation. I was there we go out every summer for 2.5 weeks to do housing repairs, to work on youth issues. And one of the things we did this particular year was we helped to renovate a building the tribe gave to one of our communities to provide safe shelter. And I don't mean that by overnight shelter, but a safe place for kids to be. When our kids here, and my kids did this growing up, you know, there's nothing to do. And it's like, when the kids out there say that, there literally is nothing to do. These isolated communities that are, you know, down a dirt road 35 miles and, you know, the nearest grocery store is 98 miles away. When they say it, they mean it. And this place is being volunteered with some very caring adults who really want to see that our young people in this community that has one of the highest suicide rates has some kind of facility for the kids to go to and get some food and have some fun. And so we were able to bring from Connecticut, from a lot of very generous donors here, pool table and a foosball table and sports equipment and all kinds of other things, so that there's at least a place now for our kids in this particular community.
And I guess that's really in our closing moment together. Where can our watchers and our listeners and our friends and those who see this down the road get involved, get in touch with you, and make a donation to this beyond deserving charity?
Well, thank you for that. You can go to our website, which is Hawkwing, HAWKWING.org.
Mm-hmm.
You can call me at 860-633-8933. We have no paid staff, so when you call that number, you get me. There's no secretaries. There's nobody else but me. And, well, I don't mean that. We have hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, but no paid staff. I'm not paid either, by the way. But you can get a hold of us. Those are the two easiest ways, hawkwing.org or through my phone number. And I'd love to have conversations with people. I'd love to see some sports teams. We've got semi-pro and pro teams all over this country in basketball, baseball, football, soccer. Come aboard, do something, adopt these kids, and see if we can get them.
Oh yeah, if Major League Baseball could spend one day, one day's gate, in so many things, what a world it would be.
Would be incredible. We want to get a pool out there. These kids would love to be able to. It's 106 degrees out there today, and the one pool they used to have, which was only serving one community, it was so old they couldn't even repair it anymore. Kids would love to swim. They'd love to get in. We actually have a boxing club that one of our former chairmen formed, and we just had our 11-year-old girl win the national championship for her age group. That's pretty awesome, to be able to do that. These kids are hungry to have a better education, an opportunity for sports. We all know how much sports mean. I mean, they are good for your mind, they're good for your body, they're good for your spirit, and we need our kids to have that. A Little League team, have a fundraiser. Go collect some water bottles and send the check in to us. I promise you that the dollars we get, 95 cents on every dollar, gets used directly out on the reservation. The 5% winds up going pretty much to supporting our warehouse here in Glastonbury. We're very transparent. If you're in the general area, I'll be happy to meet you down at the warehouse, show you around, show you what we're doing. And you can come on truck day. We have a trucking company here in Connecticut, World Fulfillment Logistics, that gives us a semi twice a year at no cost to bring everything we collect out there. You can come in October and pack up holiday gift boxes for the kids. 2,600 kids ages birth to 18. There's a lot of ways to volunteer, but the dollars are key to our being able to do the development work that needs to take place.
Well, we've been honored tonight. Rochelle Ripley, the founder of Hawkwing Inc., and we have all taken a well-needed education. Rochelle, thanks so much for being with us. I really do appreciate it, and do keep us posted. And God willing, we'll be here, and you can let us know what's happening from time to time and get on and tell us about it.
Would love to, and thank you so much, Tony, for reaching out and doing this. I'm very appreciative.
My pleasure. Take care.
You too.
Thank you so much. And that was Rochelle Ripley, and wow, what an education that was for me. We're going to be coming right back with sports oddities, and you're not going to believe this. On Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast, Mike figured out the bump button, and that's what summertime does, kind of puts you in that little bit of a haze. Right back, right after this.